train pulls into the station, and then it simply disappears, not into a tunnel, under a living tide of 10,000 people clinging to its roof and its sides 16 feet above the rails. That is where we begin. Across the world, a handful of railways run in places that seem to reject the very idea of a train. A glass cabin bolted to the face of a Chinese cliff, a line that climbs into the clouds at nearly 13,900 feet, a track that floats across a blood-pink lake in Siberia. Some of these lines were laid more than a century ago and still run almost unchanged.
Separate the wheels from the abyss.
Here, one mistake offers no second chance, and the line between the trip of a lifetime and a tragedy has never been thinner. Why do these routes still exist? Right now, keep your eyes on the screen, because we are riding the world's deadliest and most dangerous railway tracks on Earth, all in stunning 4K, routes so perilous they shouldn't even exist. Make it to the final station with us and hit subscribe. You will have earned the seat. This is Tongi in Bangladesh, a crowded town on the banks of the Turag River, a short ride north of the capital Dhaka. For most of the year, its railway looks ordinary. Then, once a year, the Bishwa Ijtema arrives, the second largest Islamic gathering on earth, and close to 5 million pilgrims pour toward this single spot. When the final prayer ends, they all try to leave at once. Bangladesh Railway lays on special trains for the pilgrimage, but no timetable was ever built for a crowd like this. The carriages fill, then the doorways fill, and then the roof becomes the last seat available. Look closely, and the train almost vanishes. Steel and windows disappear under a living shell of people packed shoulder to shoulder more than a dozen feet above the rails, riding the wide colonial era tracks the British left behind.
Well, this guy's just jumping on. He's just jumped on a moving train. Look at him. Look at him.
There are no straps, no railings, nothing to hold but each other and the ridge of the roof. A sudden break, a low bridge, a bare electric line overhead. Any one of them can turn a journey home into a funeral. Everyone up there knows it. They climb up anyway. That is the strange heart of this place. It is not thrill-seeking, and it is not spectacle. It is faith heavy enough that thousands will gamble the trip home on the roof of a moving train and count the risk as worth it. Dajui Mountain rises in Zixi County, deep in China's Jiangxi province, a land of ancient forest and thousand-year-old Buddhist temples, where the peaks spend half the year hidden in cloud. Bolted to the face of that mountain is one of the strangest scenic railways in the world. The cliffside train runs for roughly 8 miles along a track pinned to sheer rock climbing to around 3,900 feet. Its carriages are panoramic glass floor to ceiling, so there is almost nothing between you and the drop. On a clear morning, the ride is pure postcard, a breathtaking glide above a sea of white cloud with green pines breaking through below. That is the bucket list version, the one in the brochure. Then the cloud thins, the valley opens beneath the glass, and the postcard turns to vertigo. For long stretches, the cabin hangs out over open air, hugging a wall of stone, with the canyon floor a dizzying distance down. Your eyes tell you the floor is solid. Everything older and more animal in you disagrees. This is adventure travel engineered as a controlled scare reel danger, sanded down to something you can buy a ticket for and photograph on the way through. So here is the honest question. Would you press your palm flat against that glass and look straight down? Or would you sit dead center, stare at the ceiling, and wait for solid ground? High in the Andes of northwestern Argentina runs a railway that earned a name most trains never do. They call it the Tren a las Nubes, the train to the clouds. It is one of the highest railways on Earth, and it climbs to a place where the thin air itself becomes part of the danger. The line sets out near the town of San Antonio de los Cobres and grinds upward across the Puna, a vast, treeless high desert, the color of rust and ochre. There are no tunnels boring through the mountains here. When the American engineer Richard Morey laid out this route back in 1921, he turned down the easy fixes. No cogwheel, no toothed rail to bite into the climb. Instead, the train earns its height the hard way doubling back on itself through a dizzying system of zigzags and spirals, crawling into the sky, one switchback at a time. The reward is a single unforgettable structure, the La Polverilla Viaduct. It is a curved steel bridge about 735 feet long and 207 feet high, flung across a raw canyon at nearly 13,850 feet above sea level. As the train eases onto it, the ground drops clean away, and for a few seconds, the carriages seem to ride on nothing but cold mountain air. That altitude is the quiet threat. This high, your lungs get barely 2/3 of the oxygen they expect, and the climb comes fast. Passengers keep oxygen close at hand, and the crew watches for the headaches and swimming vision that arrive when the mountain starts to win. In 2014, a train slipped from these rails at around 13,000 feet, and hundreds of people had to be walked and carried down off the pass. Every corner of the world for this one guided journey into the clouds. You feel the wind pour through the open window and moan across bare rock. And crossing that viaduct with the Andes stacked to the horizon and the desert floor impossibly far below, you understand exactly how small a person is up here and how stubborn one has to be to lay iron across the roof of the world. Out in northern Utah in the United States, a single rock railroad runs straight across the Great Salt Lake, the largest saltwater lake in the Western Hemisphere. From the ground, it looks like an ordinary freight line. From the air, it becomes one of the strangest sights on any railway map in the country. The causeway is a 20-mile wall of rock and fill part of the historic route first laid across the water back in 1902. It does something no bridge was ever meant to do. It cuts the lake clean in two, and the two halves refuse to match. On the north side, the water turns a deep rose red, so salty that little more than microbes and tiny brine shrimp can survive in it. On the south side, fed by fresh rivers, it stays a pale blue-green. One rock line, two different seas. Here is the part the postcards leave out. This whole structure is slowly sinking. It sits on a soft lake bed of silt and ooze right over a crack in the Earth's crust, and across the years it has settled some 15 feet down into the muck. Add water saltier than the ocean quietly gnawing at everything made of metal, and you have a working railroad built on a foundation that is trying to swallow it. Roughly 20 freight trains still cross it every single day. So would you trust 20 miles of rock, floating on pudding poison, bright water pressing in on both sides to carry thousands of tons of steel back and forth, year after year? In the mountains of Graubünden, in eastern Switzerland, stands a bridge that seems built to frighten you and delight you in the very same breath. This is the Landwasser Viaduct, one of the most photographed structures on the entire Rhaetian Railway and part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. A slender stone bridge, 6 tall limestone arches, curves through the air 213 feet above a wild valley floor. Follow that curve to its far end, and it runs not onto solid ground, but straight into a black tunnel mouth carved into a sheer cliff. There is no run-up and no pause. The train sweeps across the arch's banks, hard into the bend, and disappears into the rock. What makes it stranger still is how it was raised. Back in 1901, the engineer Alexander Akatos built those tall piers with almost no scaffolding at all, lifting the stone into place with cranes instead. More than a century later, it still carries the Glacier Express and the Bernina Express, two of the most celebrated scenic railway journeys anywhere in the world. Ride across it, and the illusion is complete. As the carriages lean into that tight curve, the piers fall away beneath the windows, and for a few long seconds, it feels less like crossing a bridge and more like being flung clean off the edge of one out into open alpine air. Climbing the flank of Mount Washington in New Hampshire in the United States is a little train that has been doing the impossible since 1869. This is the Mount Washington Cog Railway, the first mountain climbing cog railway ever built, and it crawls toward a summit known for some of the worst weather on Earth. The train does not roll on ordinary wheels. A toothed center rail, a cog, grips the locomotive and drags it up slopes far too steep for any normal train to hold. The cruelest of them is a trestle called Jacob's Ladder, pitched at a brutal 37% grade. On that stretch, the locomotive is actually built, crooked, its boiler tilted, just so it stays level while the mountain drops away beneath it. Then there is the mountain itself. The summit sits at 6,288 feet, and in 1934, the wind up here was clocked at 231 miles an hour. For decades, the highest surface wind speed ever recorded anywhere on the planet. Calm sunshine can turn to a screaming whiteout in minutes. The little railway has climbed through nearly all of it, though not without a price. In 1967, a train slipped from the rack near Jacob's Ladder, and 8 people. So here you are, tipped backward in that crooked car, the cog grinding under your feet, wind hammering the glass. Is this a triumph of stubborn American engineering, or a dare you should never have taken? In the green hills of Kanchanaburi in western Thailand runs a line that people have never stopped calling by one terrible name: the Death Railway. On the surface, it looks gentle, a single track threading through jungle, curving along limestone cliffs, crossing the wide brown River Kwai on trestles of timber and steel. Ride it today, and school children share the carriage with you. The horror is buried just under all that green. This railway was thrown down in barely over a year, from 1942 to 1943, by the occupying Japanese army during the Second World War. They wanted a supply line running roughly 258 miles from Thailand into Burma. Across country earlier, surveyors had judged all but impossible, so they forced it through with captive hands. More than 60,000 Allied prisoners of war and some 200,000 Asian laborers were made to carve it out of the hills with elephants, dragging timber through the mud beside them. The cost is almost impossible to hold in your head. By the time the last spike went in, more than 100,000 people were dead from disease, starvation, exhaustion, and open cruelty. Spread across 258 miles of track, that is a grim reckoning of close to 400 lives for every single mile. Nowhere carries it like Hellfire Pass. Here, men cut a corridor straight through solid rock, roughly 80 feet deep and 250 feet long, with little more than hammers, hand chisels, and worn-down bodies. They labored around the clock through the worst of it, lit after dark by burning torches and oil fires. It was that sight, starving men working in the flame light, that gave the pass its name. Only the Thai stretch still carries trains now out as far as Nam Tok. When the wheels roll slow across those old wooden bridges, it is hard to hear anything triumphant in the sound. Just the quiet weight of what a single railway line was allowed to cost. Out on the edge of the Sahara, in Mauritania, one of the longest and heaviest trains on Earth comes crawling across the sand. This is the iron ore train, and it has been making the same brutal run since 1963. A single track, 437 miles of it, ties the desert mining town of Zouarat to the Atlantic port of Nouadhibou, with almost nothing but emptiness in between. The scale is hard to believe. The train can stretch close to 1.5 miles from end to end, more than 200 open wagons heaped with raw iron ore dragged through a furnace of sand and wind. For years, locals and a handful of hardened travelers have ridden it free, climbing up to perch right on top of the ore, wrapped against the dust for a crossing that can last most of a day. It is not a comfortable kind of adventure travel. By day, the heat climbs past 100 degrees. After dark, the desert turns bitterly cold, and fine, iron dust works its way into everything: your clothes, your eyes, your lungs. One hard jolt, one moment of bad sleep too near the edge, and the Sahara is waiting below. And yet, lying back on a mountain of ore as the sun drops and the stars come out over the dunes, riders describe a strange, stripped-down kind of freedom out here. Nothing but the rumble of steel, the cold night air, and 1,000 miles of open desert in every direction. In the heart of Hanoi, in Vietnam, there is a street where a full-size train runs straight through people's front rooms. This is Hanoi Train Street, a narrow lane in the old quarter where the French laid a railway back in 1902, and the city simply grew up tight around the tracks. Homes, doorways, and tiny cafes crowd in from both sides, close enough that in places the passing train clears the front steps by only a few feet.
And the train just passed, so everybody's trying.
Life here runs on the timetable. A whistle carries down the alley, and within seconds, the calm breaks into a fast practice scramble. Chairs yanked in awnings folded, children pulled back, everything cleared before the steel wall rumbles through at walking pace. For decades, this was simply ordinary life. Then social media found it. Crowds poured in chasing the perfect shot, some stepping onto the live tracks at exactly the wrong moment, and after people were hurt, the authorities began closing the street, reopening it, and closing it again. The trains never stopped. They still come. So the question hangs over the lane every single day. Is this a beautiful bucket list glimpse of a city living side by side with its railway, or a tragedy waiting on one more person who wanted a better photo? Not every dangerous railway hangs over an abyss. Some run straight through your grocery shopping. This is the Maeklong Railway Market in Samut Songkhram, Thailand, and at first glance, it looks like any other packed local market. Vegetables, fresh fish, buckets of red chilies, all laid out under low awnings in a crowded lane. Then you notice what the lane actually is. Running right down the middle beneath the produce are two live railway tracks. Roughly 8 times a day, a real train comes through here. A horn sounds somewhere down the line, and the whole market performs a trick it has perfected over more than a century. Awnings fold back, baskets slide clear, and vendors draw their goods in just far enough sometimes, only a hand's width from the wheels, as the train eases past at a slow walking pace. The moment it clears everything, swings back out. Fish and vegetables return to their spots beside the rails, as though nothing happened. Locals gave the place a perfect name: Talad Rom Hoop, the umbrella pull-down market. The line opened back in 1905, and the market simply refused to move aside for it. So the two learned to share the same narrow strip of ground over and over, day after day, without missing a beat. Far out in the Altai region of southern Russia lies a lake that looks like something spilled from another planet. This is Lake Belinskoye, and across its shallow rose-pink water runs one of the strangest railways you will ever see. The water glows pink, because tiny, salt-loving algae and brine shrimp thrive in it, and straight through that color runs a set of narrow rails. The train here crosses no bridge at all. The rails are laid right down on the salt bed, sitting at the surface of the water, so from a distance, the little locomotive seems to glide across the lake itself. Its work is old and simple, hauling out the thick crust of salt that people have harvested from this water since the 1700s. Everything the lake touches, it slowly destroys. The locomotive and wagons are caked ghostly white, their metal pitted and gnawed by brine, far harsher than the sea. The rails underneath sit in that same bath, quietly weakening year after year. So there it is, salt-blinded and rust-scarred, crawling across a pink mirror in the middle of nowhere. Would you trust those slowly dissolving rails to hold your weight, or would you rather watch this one from the shore? Deep in the Shan Hills of Myanmar stands a bridge that looks a century out of place because it very nearly is. This is the Gokteek Viaduct, a vast lattice of steel flung across a green gorge on the old railway line between Mandalay and the town of Lashio. When it was finished in 1900, it was the largest railway trestle in the world. The numbers still impress. It runs about 2,260 feet from end to end and stands roughly 335 feet above the gorge floor, carried on tall, slender steel towers. Below that, the drop keeps going. The stream at the bottom disappears into a cave in the limestone hundreds of feet deeper still. And every piece of it was cast far away in Pennsylvania in the United States, then shipped halfway around the world and bolted together over this remote ravine. More than 100 years of monsoon rain and heat have worked on that old steel ever since, so the train does not race across. It slows to a careful walking pace, and as the wheels inch out over the void, the whole frame ticks and creaks under the load, a sound no passenger forgets. For the people aboard, there are no walls of safety glass and no thick guardrails, just open windows, a narrow deck of track, and a long green nothing falling away on both sides. Some lean out to photograph it. Others go very quiet. Cross it slowly enough, suspended on hand-built iron above that gorge, and the century behind the bridge stops feeling like history. It starts to feel like something you are trusting with your life right now, one creak at a time. On the shoulder of Mount Pilatus, above Lake Lucerne in Switzerland, climbs a little red train that arguably should not be able to grip the mountain at all. This is the Pilatus Railway, and since 1889, it has held a record no one has ever taken from it: the steepest cogwheel railway in the world. At its worst, the track tilts to a 48% grade. That is steep enough that you could not stand upright on it. A slope most people would climb on their hands and knees. An ordinary train would simply slide back down. What saves this one is a clever trick hidden between the rails. A central steel bar with teeth cut into its sides, gripped by horizontal gears beneath the car that lock it to the mountain so it cannot tip or slip even in a hard crosswind. Still something in you rebels on the way up. The valley drops away behind the rock wall, slides past just beyond the glass, and for half an hour, the only thing between you and a very long tumble toward the lake is a row of steel teeth doing their job. Locals have their own take on the unease. For centuries, this was called Dragon Mountain, a peak said to be haunted and best left alone. So, which will you trust on the climb? The engineering or the old warning to stay off the dragon's back? In the far north of Queensland in Australia, a heritage train winds up through some of the oldest rainforest on Earth. This is the Kuranda Scenic Railway, and it climbs from the coast near Cairns into the misty green heights of the Barron Gorge, a UNESCO World Heritage rainforest laced with waterfalls. The line was hacked out of the range by hand in the 1880s and opened in 1891. To gain the height, crews cut 15 tunnels straight through the rock and through bridges across the ravines, working on slopes so steep and slippery that at least 23 of them never made it home. The centerpiece is the curved Stony Creek Falls Bridge, where the train eases across a delicate steel span, while a waterfall spills down the cliff right beside the windows, close enough to miss the glass. But the mountain has not forgotten how to move. In 2010, a landslide caught a train carrying 250 passengers and threw it off the rails. By sheer luck, only 5 people were hurt. and the line sat closed for weeks while crews made the slope safe again. Ride it on a clear morning, gliding above the gorge, with the rainforest breathing on every side, and it is easy to forget you are crossing ground that still shifts underfoot. High on the Qinghai Plateau in western China lies a lake so still and so bright that people call it the mirror of the sky. This is Chaka Salt Lake, sitting more than 10,000 feet above sea level, and on a calm day, its surface becomes a flawless sheet of glass that swallows the mountains and clouds whole. Running straight out across it is a small train. The rails are laid over the hard crust of salt, so as the little carriages roll toward the horizon, they seem to float across the reflected sky itself, carrying riders out into a world with no clear line between water and air. It is one of the strangest and most beautiful railway rides you can take anywhere. The beauty comes with a quiet bite. This high, the air is thin enough to leave you lightheaded and short of breath, and the surface you are gliding over is not soil but salt, a dense wet crust that eats at metal and leaves the rails and wheels crusted a ghostly white. Nothing built out here lasts long without a fight. Step off at the far end onto a plain of white that mirrors the heavens in every direction, and the train behind you looks less like a machine and more like a thin, dark thread stitched across the sky. Up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado in the United States, a little steam train performs a trick that looks like it belongs on a toy set. This is the Georgetown Loop Railroad, and its whole reason for existing is a problem of pure stubbornness. Two old silver mining towns, Georgetown and Silver Plume, sit barely 2 miles apart, but the slope between them was far too steep for a train to climb head-on. So back in 1884, at the height of the Colorado Silver Rush, engineers refused to give up. Instead of going straight, they built a corkscrew. The line loops all the way around and crosses directly over itself on the Devil's Gate High Bridge, a slender trestle standing about 95 feet above the creek. From your seat, you can look down and watch the lower track, the very rails you rolled over minutes earlier, passing beneath your feet. The gamble did not last. As the silver ran out, the loop fell silent, and the great bridge was torn down and sold for scrap. For decades, the canyon sat empty. Then, a full century later, crews rebuilt the high bridge to the original plans, and the little train climbs its impossible spiral once again. So would you ride a corkscrew, hung in the mountain air, staring down at your own tracks below, just to see how the West once bent iron to its will?
But if you keep going, you can go out to Spiral Jetty, and that's pretty cool.
Off the southern tip of India, a railway leaves the mainland and strikes out straight across the open sea toward the sacred island of Rameswaram. This is the Pamban crossing, and when the first bridge opened here in 1914, it was India's first sea bridge, a low ribbon of track running well over a mile across the Pork Strait, with a section in the middle that lifted to let ships slip through. The trouble is where it sits. This is deep inside the Indian Ocean's cyclone belt, a place of sudden storms, hard salt wind, and waves that can climb right over the rails. In 1964, a monster cyclone proved exactly how cruel that can be, sweeping a passenger train clean off the bridge and into the sea, and taking more than 100 lives with it. For over a century, the old bridge held on while the salt air ate at every rivet. By 2022, it was finally worn out and closed for good. But the crossing was too important to abandon, and in 2025, a brand new lifting bridge opened right alongside it, carrying the trains on across that same restless water. So the sea still gets the last word out here. Would you take that ride across open ocean, trusting steel and timing against a coastline built for storms. On the southern rim of China's Taklamakan Desert runs a railway that engineers were once told could not be built. This is the Hotan-Rokiang line in the far west of the country, and when it opened in 2022, it completed something the world had never seen: a full ring of railway, looping an entire desert, more than 500 miles of it, clawed across a wilderness the Chinese call the Sea of Death. The enemy here is the sand itself. The Taklamakan is a place of shifting dunes and screaming sandstorms, and left alone, it would bury a set of tracks in a single season. So the builders fought it on two fronts. Along the worst stretches, they lifted the whole railway onto viaducts, roughly 30 miles of bridges, where the trains ride overhead while the dunes drift freely underneath. Then they went further, planting a living wall against the desert. Tens of millions of shrubs and a vast grid of straw laid across the sand, a green belt hundreds of miles long whose only job is to hold the dunes in place. Ride it now, and you glide for hours above an ocean of sand that is quietly, endlessly trying to swallow the line. So who wins in the end out here? The desert, or the people who refuse to let it close the road? Far up in Alaska, in the United States, there is a railway that trades all the danger for something close to peace. This is the Denali Star, and it runs some 356 miles through the frozen heart of the far north, between Anchorage and Fairbanks, across country, where in places there are simply no roads at all. Much of this line was laid over permafrost ground that stays frozen for most of the year and shifts as it thaws, and the whole railroad was finally completed back in 1923. Its boldest moment comes at Hurricane Gulch, where the track leaps a deep ravine on a steel arch about 918 feet long, leaving the carriages suspended nearly 300 feet above the creek far below. But the thing people remember is not the engineering, it is the silence and the sky. Out here, the train glides past endless spruce forest and the great white shoulder of Denali, with moose and bears somewhere back in the trees, and on the darkest winter nights, the northern lights pour green and violet clear across the horizon. There is no cliff to grip here, no crowd, no gamble with the sea, just a warm carriage sliding through a vast, frozen, empty land, and above it, a whole sky quietly on fire. So there they are, a scattering of railways clinging to the edges of the possible. Some were flung across gorges and deserts by sheer nerve. Some were pulled through by faith or greed or a stubbornness that bordered on madness. Every one of them asks the same quiet thing of anyone who climbs aboard, to trust a thin line of steel over a very long drop or a very deep sea, or a mountain that never really agreed to be crossed. Maybe that is the whole pull of it. For a few miles, the world feels enormous again, and we feel very small. And somehow, that is exactly why we go. Now we would love to hear from you. Of all these routes, which one would you actually dare to ride, and which one could you never set foot on? Tell us in the comments. And if you made it all the way to the final station, with us, subscribe and stay aboard for the next journey. Right now, somewhere in Norway, a person is standing on a boulder, no wider than a kitchen table, wedged into a crack above a drop of more than 3,200 feet, with nothing under their heels but fog and open air. One slip, and there is no second chance. And here is the strange part. That rock should have fallen 10,000 years ago. It didn't. This is one of Earth's most impossible places, and it is only the beginning. Today, we're crossing the planet to stand inside its most mysterious geological wonders, the kind of formations that scientists still cannot fully explain. We'll walk under a stone arch in China so vast that fighter jets have flown straight through it. We'll stand on ground in Africa that boils in colors no other place on Earth can make. And 10,000 years ago, deep in the Sahara, someone climbed into these rocks and painted a figure with a round head like a person sealed inside a helmet. Nobody knows who they were. Nobody knows what they saw. And that painting is still there today, waiting at the end of a long desert journey. We'll even reach a remote island in the sky in South America, walled off by sheer cliffs and sealed from the world for millions of years. Some of these places are sacred, some are deadly. All of them feel impossible. So before we set out, subscribe and come with us, because this is one journey you'll want to take all the way to the edge of the world. Our journey begins high in the mountains of southwestern Norway, on a trail that climbs for hours above a fjord called the Lysefjord. People come all this way for one thing: a single rock. It is called Kiragbolten, and it sits jammed into a narrow crack between two cliff walls with a clean drop of more than 3,200 feet falling away beneath it. No fence, no railing, no safety rope of any kind. Just a smooth, rounded stone about the size of a small car, and a quiet line of people waiting their turn to step out onto it. The boulder didn't roll here on its own. It was carried down by a glacier, a slow river of ice near the end of the last ice age. When the ice finally pulled back roughly 10,000 years ago, the rock dropped into this gap and stuck fast. Two faces of stone press against it from either side, and that constant squeeze is the only thing holding it up. That is the whole secret. There is nothing underneath. And this is one of the most isolated viewpoints in all of Norway. The fog rolls in off the Lysefjord, and everything beneath the rock vanishes into white until the boulder and the people standing on it seem to hang in mid-air above nothing at all. So here is a question worth sitting with. Could you actually walk out and stand on it? Some hikers walk straight out and step on without slowing down. Others get close look once into that drop and quietly decide the view from solid ground is enough. Nobody judges them. There is something strange about crossing the planet and climbing half a day up a Norwegian mountain, all to stand on a rock that a sheet of ice left behind by accident. From a cold Norwegian cliff, we traveled to the warm, hazy mountains of eastern Myanmar, to a rock that breaks the very same rule in a completely different way. This is the Golden Rock of Kyaiktiyo in Myanmar, and at first glance, it looks like a giant gold-covered boulder that someone balanced on the very lip of a mountain and then simply walked away. It weighs hundreds of tons. It leans out past the edge of the cliff. By every instinct you have, it should have tumbled into the valley a long time ago. It has not moved. What holds it there is almost nothing. The rock barely touches the slab beneath it, and the point of contact is so small that pilgrims say a thin thread can be passed all the way underneath, and that daylight slips through the gap. For more than 1,000 years, that impossible little balance has been treated not as a curiosity, but as a sacred thing. The faithful here believe the boulder is held in place by a single strand of the Buddha's hair kept inside the small shrine built on top of it. Pilgrims climb the mountain to reach it, and over the centuries, they have pressed so many fine layers of gold leaf onto its surface that the whole rock now glows in the mountain mist. But not everyone may touch it. A short bridge leads across to the rock, and a small sign marks where the rule begins. Only men are allowed to cross and press their gold leaf onto the stone because the boulder is said to hold the shape of a holy man's head, and by old belief, a woman's hand must never rest on something this sacred. So the women climb the same long path and pray from the edge of the platform, watching as the gold is laid on one thin square at a time. Science can talk about the angle, the friction, the exact shape of the stone. But stand in front of it, watching it shine on the edge of a fall. It has no business surviving, and you begin to understand why so many people here chose faith instead. Our next stop is one of the most dramatic mountains in all of China. It rises straight out of the forests near the city of Zhangjiajie in Hunan province, and near its summit, the rock is pierced clean through by an enormous natural opening. The locals call it Heaven's Gate. From the valley floor, it looks like a doorway cut into the sky, more than 430 feet tall, with daylight pouring through to the other side. For most of human history, you reach that gate the hard way. A road now climbs to the foot of it, folding back on itself 99 times as it claws up the mountainside, and from there, a stone staircase of 999 steps rises straight toward the opening. People still make that climb today, one breath at a time, the way travelers and pilgrims have for centuries. And here is how serious this gate is. In 2006, stunt pilots flew fighter jets straight through the opening, threading aircraft through a hole in a mountain at full speed. The footage looks almost fake. It is not. Getting to the top is its own kind of expedition. The longest passenger cable car in the world runs for about 4.5 miles, carrying you from the city right up the mountain, gliding over rooftops, then farmland, then the cliffs themselves. And once you are up there, narrow walkways cling to the rock face, some of them floored with glass, so the only thing between your feet and a drop of thousands of feet is a clear pane you can stare straight through. For more than 200 days a year, this whole place is swallowed by cloud. The steps turn slick, the gate fills with mist, and the people climbing toward it seem to walk straight into the sky and disappear. So far, every impossible place we have seen was shaped by the planet itself over thousands or millions of years. This next one is different. We built it by accident. Out in the high desert of northern Nevada, far off the highway and behind a locked ranch gate, 3 small towers rise from the flat scrubland, hissing steam and running with water in shades of blood, red deep green and burnt orange. It looks like something from another planet. They call it Fly Geyser, and it is one of the most surreal sights in the American West. The story starts in 1964. A company drilled a test well here, hunting for geothermal heat energy from deep underground. The water they struck came up scalding, far too hot to use, so they gave up and left the hole behind, never sealing it properly. The desert took it from there. Hot, mineral-heavy water has been pushing up through that forgotten well ever since for more than 60 years, without a single pause. As it sprays into the dry air, the minerals it carries harden into stone, raising the towers a little higher each year, so slowly that the whole formation looks almost alive. And the wild colors running down its sides really are alive. They come from tiny, heat-loving microbes thriving in the hot water, the same kind of life that paints a hot spring in rainbow bands. For decades, this sat on private land, hidden from nearly everyone. The ranch now belongs to the organization behind the Burning Man Festival, and the only way to stand near the geyser is a small guided tour booked far in advance. A wonder we created by mistake, now guarded like a relic. Our last stop in this first stretch is the hardest to reach of them all. In the far southeast of Algeria, where the Sahara hardens into bare rock, there is a plateau called Tassili Naja. The name means the Plateau of Rivers, which sounds like a cruel joke today because this is now one of the most remote and lifeless corners of the planet. To get here, you travel for days out, past the last paved roads into an ocean of sand and stone where the heat climbs well past 100 degrees. And then the ground rises into something that has no business being out here at all. Stretching to the horizon is a forest made of stone. Wind and sand have cut the sandstone into thousands of towers, arches, and narrow passages, a vast, empty city of rock, lost to time. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it guards one of the greatest open-air galleries of ancient art found anywhere on Earth. On the sheltered walls deep inside the maze, there are paintings. More than 15,000 of them, some reaching back around 10,000 years. Hunters, long lines of cattle, dancers. And then the figures that stop you, cold, tall shapes with smooth, rounded heads, featureless that to modern eyes look unsettlingly like a person sealed inside a helmet. When a French explorer first copied them in the 1950s, he nicknamed one the Great Martian God, and the name stuck. The rock holds a stranger truth than any story about visitors from the sky. Painted right beside the people are crocodiles, hippos, creatures of deep rivers and wide lakes here in the heart of the driest desert on Earth. They are not imagined, they are memory. These paintings are what survived of a world that dried up and blew away. If this is the kind of place you came for, the kind where the answer only opens deeper questions, subscribe and stay with us, because the strangest are still ahead. We crossed half a world, expecting nothing but empty sand, and found a green country painted on the walls by people we will never meet. The Sahara held their pictures for 10,000 years. It is still not finished keeping its secrets. High in the Norwegian mountains, a thin slab of rock juts straight out from a cliff and hangs in open air more than 2,300 feet above the lake below. Nothing supports it from underneath. Nothing holds it down. The Norwegians call it Trolltunga, the troll's tongue, and a few seconds standing on the very tip of it has become one of the most chased photographs on Earth. Like the boulder we started with, this ledge is a leftover from the last ice age. Around 10,000 years ago, a thick sheet of moving ice ground into the mountainside and carved the softer rock away, leaving this one hard tongue of stone pointing out over nothing. Reaching it is not a casual day out. The trail runs roughly 17 miles there and back, climbing across steep exposed mountain terrain, and most hikers are out there close to 10 or 12 hours. There are no guardrails at the end, no barrier, no rope, no warning fence between your boots and a long fall into the valley. Norway has chosen to leave it raw exactly the way the ice left it. So people line up out on that bare stone for the picture that says they stood at the edge of the world and looked down. Then they turn around and walk the long miles back, and the tongue stays exactly where it is, pointing out at a view it has been holding since before anyone was here to climb toward it. In the remote western reaches of the island of Madagascar, off the coast of southeastern Africa, there is a forest you cannot walk through, not because of the trees, because the ground itself has turned into a field of stone blades. This is Chingi de Bemaraha, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the local name says everything you need to know. Chingi means roughly the place where you cannot walk barefoot. The rock here rises in thousands of grey limestone needles packed close together edges, honed to a point so fine they can slice clean through a thick hiking boot. Around 200 million years ago, this was an ancient seabed, a flat bed of soft limestone laid down under shallow water. Then the land lifted, the rains came, and millions of years of water cut down through the stone along every crack, leaving the blades standing, and the gaps falling away into deep, shadowed slots. Much of this maze is so sharp and so broken that people have still never set foot in large parts of it. And yet something lives here, right out on the edges. White sifaka lemurs, with soft padded hands and feet leap from one razor tip to the next, barefoot across ground that would shred anything else alive. For the few visitors who come the way through is a series of narrow suspension bridges strung high above the points, swaying over a drop onto 1,000 stone knives. Across the world in central Turkey lies a valley that looks like a city built by something that was not quite human. These are the fairy chimneys of Cappadocia. Tall, pale cones of rock rise by the hundreds across the hills, each one slim at the bottom and capped with a single, dark, heavy stone on top, like a field of stone towers wearing hats. The fairy chimneys people here have always called them. They were born in fire. Ancient volcanoes buried this land in deep layers of ash, which hardened into a soft rock that wind and rain then carved into these strange standing pillars. The harder cap on each one shielded the column beneath it from the weather, which is why every fairy chimney keeps its narrow neck and its heavy crown. Now here is the part that pulls this place out of a geology lesson. The rock is soft enough to dig into by hand, and for thousands of years, that is exactly what people did. These are the ancient cave dwellings of Cappadocia. They hollowed homes, churches, stables, and whole underground cities straight into the stone. And many of those carved rooms are still lived in today. This is not a ruin you tour behind a rope. Families wake up inside these rocks, run cafes and small cave hotels in them, and step out their front doors into a landscape that shifts from pale pink to gold to deep orange as the sun moves. And at first light, the whole valley fills with color of another kind as dozens of hot air balloons drift up over the fairy chimneys. The Cappadocia balloon sunrise has become one of the most famous experiences in all of travel. We are heading back to China now, to a place that feels less like scenery and more like a dream you are not quite sure you are allowed to be in. This is the Wulingyuan Scenic Area in Hunan Province, and it holds something you will not see anywhere else on this scale. More than 3,000 sandstone pillars rise straight up out of the green, some of them taller than 660 feet, packed so close together, they form a forest made of stone instead of trees. People know it best by the name of one of its parks, Zhangjiaji. What makes these pillars so strange is how thin and tall they stand without falling. They were not pushed up like a mountain. This whole region was once a flat layer of stone, and over hundreds of millions of years, running water and slow erosion ate away everything soft and loose, until only these hard, vertical spines were left standing in the open air. Then the weather does the rest. For much of the year, low cloud and mist settle into the valleys between the pillars, swallowing the ground completely. The bases disappear, and the tops float free, scattered across the white like separate islands hanging in the sky. If that image feels familiar, there is a reason. The floating mountains of the film Avatar were inspired by these very peaks, and one of the pillars here now openly carries that name. And to bring you up into those clouds, China built the tallest outdoor elevator on the planet, straight onto the cliff face here, a glass car that climbs more than 1,000 feet up the bare rock in about a minute and a half, lifting you out of the forest and into the floating mountains the movie Avatar made famous. From a forest of stone in the clouds, we drop into a desert so otherworldly that filmmakers keep using it to stand in for another planet entirely. This is Wadi Rum in southern Jordan, a protected desert that people have called the Valley of the Moon for a very long time. Huge sandstone and granite mountains erupt straight out of red sand, split by narrow gorges and shadowed canyons hung with natural stone arches, the whole horizon glowing in shades of rust and orange. Hollywood has noticed, when a film needs the surface of Mars, this is often where they go. The deserts of Lawrence of Arabia, the Martian Dune, and more were all filmed right here on this red sand under this enormous sky. What you are looking at is one of the closest things to another world that our own planet has to offer. But people were reading meaning into these cliffs long before any camera arrived. Carved into the rock faces across Wadi Rum are petroglyphs, ancient pictures and inscriptions left by human hands. They record around 12,000 years of people passing through here, hunting, herding, marking the walls, surviving in a place that looks like it could not possibly support anyone. The Bedouins still live in this desert today, running camps out among the rocks where travelers come to sleep under one of the clearest, darkest, most crowded skies of stars left on Earth. Out here, the line between our planet and somewhere far stranger gets very thin. You can stand on red sand that has played the role of Mars in the movies beside a wall that real people carved 12,000 years ago under a sky so deep it stops feeling like home at all. There is a beach in northern Iceland where a stone animal stands in the surf head, bowed drinking from the sea. It rises from the shallow water just off the Vatnsnes Peninsula, dark and hunched about 50 feet tall. 2 holes have been worn straight through its base, and they turn the whole shape into legs so that the rock looks exactly like some huge beast leaning down to drink. Ask 10 travelers what animal it is, and you will get 10 answers. A dragon, a rhinoceros bending to the water, a dinosaur. Whatever you decide it is, you cannot unsee it. It has a name, Vitsakur, which means white shirt, and the name is honest about something less romantic. A seabird called the fulmar nests all over the top of it, and generations of droppings have streaked the dark rock, pale like a sheet thrown over the creature's shoulders. Far to the south, on a quiet stretch of New Zealand coast, the strange thing is not standing in the water. It is lying on the sand by the dozen, as if something enormous left its eggs behind. These are the Meraki boulders scattered along the beach near the village of the same name, and the first thing you notice is how round they are. Not rounded, round. Many of them measure close to 7 feet, across almost perfect spheres of dark grey stone, resting on the pale sand where the waves slide past them. They look manufactured or hatched. They are neither. Each one grew slowly the way a pearl does. Around 60 million years ago, minerals in the ancient seabed began gathering around a small center, hardening outward in every direction over millions of years, building these stone globes layer by patient layer inside the soft mud of the ocean floor. The mud later became the low cliffs behind the beach, and now the sea is wearing those cliffs away, freeing the boulders one at a time and rolling them down onto the sand. Some of them have cracked open, and here is where they get genuinely strange because the inside does not match the plain grey shell. Split boulders reveal hollow centers laced with veins of bright, golden-orange crystal, like a geode the size of a beach ball, a hidden color no one would ever guess from the outside. Our last stop in this stretch is not on a coast at all, which is exactly what makes it so confusing to look at. High on a forested mountaintop in the northeast of Thailand, 3 enormous rocks lie side by side, long and smooth and curved, and from the right angle, they are unmistakable. They look like 3 whales swimming through the air, a parent on each side, and a smaller one between them, rising out of a sea that is not there. The locals call it 3-Whale Rock, and when morning mist pools in the valley below, the illusion finishes itself, 3 giants gliding above an ocean of cloud. What makes it stranger is how old they are. This sandstone has been here for around 75 million years, dating back to when dinosaurs still walked this land, slowly shaped by nothing more dramatic than rain and wind, wearing the softer rock away beneath the harder caps. Visitors can walk out onto the back of the largest whale, hundreds of feet above the forest, and stand where it feels like the whole mountain is about to dive. Everywhere we have been so far, the rock was the strange part. Here it is the ground itself, and it looks like the surface of a planet that should not be able to hold life. This is the Danakil Depression in the far northeast of Ethiopia, one of the lowest and hottest places anywhere on Earth. The land here sits more than 300 feet below sea level in a basin where 3 of the planet's great plates are slowly tearing apart, and the heat coming off it is hard to believe. On a normal day, the temperature climbs well past 120 degrees. And then you reach the part that does not look real. Across one corner of the depression, the ground erupts into color. Pools of neon yellow and acid green sit in crusts of orange and white, bubbling steaming, ringed by little chimneys of hardened salt. It looks painted or poisoned. The colors come from sulfur salt and iron carried up by hot springs from deep underground, drying into shapes that shift week to week, so that the same patch of earth is never quite the same twice. Nothing should survive in water that hot and that acidic. Something does. Microbes thrive right here, in the boiling, burning pools, the kind of life that pushes against everything scientists once thought life needed, which is why researchers studying the edges of survival and even the search for life on other worlds keep coming back to this exact spot. People live at the edge of it too. For generations, the Afar have crossed this furnace to cut blocks of salt from the dried lake beds by hand loading them onto long lines of camels and walking them out across the heat the way the salt has left this place for centuries. We came expecting the most lifeless ground on the planet and found people walking camels across it and life clinging on in the one place it has no business being. Deep in the remote southeast of Venezuela, where the borders of 3 countries meet the jungle, suddenly ends, and a wall of sheer rock climbs straight up into the clouds. This is Mount Roraima. The local Pemon people call this kind of mountain a tepui, a table of rock, and the name fits because the top is almost perfectly flat, a vast island in the sky held up by cliffs that drop more than 1,300 feet on every side. The rock itself is staggeringly old. The stone here is close to 2 billion years old, among the oldest exposed rock found anywhere on the surface of the earth, laid down long before there were fish in the sea or plants on the land. And being sealed off has done something remarkable. Up on top, isolated for millions of years, life went its own way. Plants grow here that grow nowhere else. Some of them trap and eat insects to survive the bare, starved ground. There is a small black toad, found only on these summits, that cannot really swim or leap to escape danger. So when a predator comes, it tucks in its legs and rolls itself into a ball, tumbling away down the rock like a tiny falling pebble. For much of the year, the whole tabletop sits buried in cloud. Waterfalls pour straight off the edges and break apart into mist before they ever reach the ground. When a British writer named Arthur Conan Doyle heard about this place over a century ago, a lost world walled off by cliffs where ancient life might still survive, he turned it into a famous novel. If a sealed island in the sky is the kind of place that keeps you watching, do us one small favor and subscribe, because the most sacred and unexplained stops on this journey are still to come. The Pemon have a name for this mountain too. They call it the House of the Gods. After days walking toward those cliffs through the rainforest, watching them rise higher and vanish into the weather that starts to feel less like a story and more like the only sensible thing to call it. On the wild northern coast of Northern Ireland, the land runs out into the sea in a way that looks deliberate, almost engineered. Tens of thousands of dark stone columns step down off the cliffs and into the Atlantic packed shoulder to shoulder, their flat tops worn smooth like paving stones laid by hand. There are around 40,000 of them, most with clean geometric sides, many of them six-sided, fitted together so tightly you could not slide a coin between them. This is the Giant's Causeway, and for a long time, no one could agree on what made it. The answer is fire and patience. Around 60 million years ago, molten rock pushed up here and cooled, and as it hardened, it cracked into these neat columns the same way drying mud splits into tiles, only frozen in solid stone. Some stand more than 60 feet against the cliffs in a tight cluster, locals named the Giant's Organ because they rise side by side, exactly like the pipes of a great church organ. But the older explanation is the one the place is named for. The story goes that an Irish giant named Finn McCool built this causeway himself, laying the stones as a road across the sea to reach a rival giant in Scotland. When he saw how huge his enemy was, he fled home and tore the road up behind him, leaving only these two ends, one here and one across the water on a Scottish island where the very same columns rise straight out of the sea. Rising straight off the plain, near the town of Kalabaka, a cluster of enormous stone pillars climbs hundreds of feet into the air, smooth and sheer and almost unclimbable. The Greeks call this place meteora, a word meaning suspended in the air, and on a misty morning, that is exactly how it looks, grey towers floating with their feet hidden in cloud. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and what sits on top of those pillars is the real wonder. Monasteries. Centuries ago, monks searching for somewhere remote enough to feel closer to God climbed these columns of the sky and built on the very tops of them, brick by brick, in places a person could barely reach at all. At the peak of it, there were 24 monasteries balanced up there, and several are still lived in and prayed in today. The obvious question is how? With no stairs and no road for hundreds of years, the only way up was by long rope nets and wooden ladders hauled hand over hand up the cliff face. Everything went up that way. The monks, the stone, the food, the occasional visitor, swinging in a net over a drop of hundreds of feet. There is an old story that when a traveler asked a monk how often they replaced the fraying rope, he answered only when the Lord lets it break. Out in the Tamar oasis in northern Saudi Arabia, two great blocks of sandstone stand in the open desert, each one balanced on a small natural base, leaning slightly apart. And running straight down the middle, splitting the stone into two clean halves, there is a gap, not a rough crack, a gap so straight and so smooth that the first time you see it, your mind refuses to call it natural. It looks cut by a blade or a beam or a machine the size of a building. This is Al-Nasla, and that impossibly neat split has made it one of the most argued over rocks on the planet. People have blamed lasers. They have blamed ancient lost technology. They have, of course, blamed visitors from another world. The line is just too perfect to be an accident. What geologists see is slower and stranger than any of that. They think the split likely opened along a natural weakness in the stone, a fault running right through it, and that thousands of years of desert weather did the rest. Heat swelling the rock by day, cold shrinking it by night, fine sand carried on the wind, polishing the two faces again and again, until what was once a rough fracture had been worn into something that looks machined. For the final stop on this entire journey, we come to a single rock rising out of the jungle and to a question that 15 centuries have not been able to answer. In the green heart of Sri Lanka, the flat forest is broken by one enormous block of stone, climbing roughly 600 feet straight up from the plain sheer on every side. It is called Sigiriya the Lion Rock, and it stands so alone so abruptly that local stories have long reached for the sky to explain it. But the strangest thing about Sigiriya is not the rock, it is what people built on top of it and how. More than 1500 years ago in the 5th century, a king named Kasyapa chose this impossible summit for his royal palace, not the foot of the rock, the top. Up there, hundreds of feet in the air, his builders raised walls, laid out courtyards, and cut great pools straight into the bare stone. An entire palace in the clouds on a rock. Most people would hesitate to climb empty-handed. And to this day, the question that hangs over the place is simple and unanswered. How did they get all of it up there, at all with no machines, onto the top of a rock most people would not dare to climb? The climb still carries the marks of that ambition. Partway up where the path narrows, you pass through the Lion Gate, and all that remains of it now are two colossal stone paws carved on either side of the stairs, the last pieces of a giant lion whose open mouth visitors once walked straight through. Kasyapa did not hold it for long. He was overthrown. Within a few years, the palace emptied and the jungle climbed the terraces back to the top until the only king left on Sigiriya was the rock itself. So that is where we leave it. We like to think of these as places we discovered, places we put on a map, gave a name, built a trail to sold a ticket for. But not one of them was made for us, and not one of them is waiting on us. They were here long before the first person came to stare, and almost all of them will still be here unchanged long after the last one leaves. Maybe that is the real reason we keep crossing the world, to stand in front of them. Not to conquer anything, just to feel for a few seconds how small and how brief we really are next to the patience of stone. Thanks for coming along to the edge of the world. We will see you on the next one. From the valley floor, it looks like the cliff grew a castle, No road leading to it, no visible entrance at ground level, just a vertical limestone wall, 40 stories of sheer rock, and halfway up built directly into the mouth of a cave, a structure that has been standing since the 13th century. That's where we begin tonight, and somehow it's one of the more straightforward of these impossible places. In the mountains of central China, Taoist monks built a temple on a vertical rock face, not beside it, not near it, directly on it, suspended above a valley so deep that clouds drift below the roofline. The only way up is a series of iron rungs hammered into the cliff one by one, with nothing beneath you but open air. A hotel in Peru's Sacred Valley hangs 400 feet off a sheer rock wall. Checking in requires climbing the cliff for 2 hours. Checking out means stepping onto a zip line. The bathroom is glass, floor to ceiling, a straight, unobstructed view down into the canyon every morning. A sacred monastery in Bhutan sits pressed against a cliff face so steep there's almost nowhere to stand. In 1998, fire took most of what was inside. The monks rebuilt, but what burned that night, no one will ever see again. "25 impossible places, lonely, dangerous houses on Earth that nobody believes exist. Places where people built a life, a shelter, a sanctuary, a home somewhere it had no business being. Some of them 1,000 years old. Some still occupied right now, tonight, by people who chose this." The question isn't only how they built these places. It's why they never left. Deep in the lowland rainforest of Papua, the forest floor never fully dries. Mud, roots, standing water, and underneath all of it, things that will kill you. Parasites, snakes, mosquitoes carrying malaria, thick enough in the air that you can feel them before you see them. So the Korowai people of Papua made a decision a long time ago. They moved up. Not a few feet off the ground, not onto a raised platform, up, into the forest canopy itself, where some of their homes sit as high as 160 feet above the jungle floor. That's roughly the height of a building 15 stories tall. Made entirely from palm leaves, forest timber, and vine lashings. Not a single nail, not a single bolt of metal anywhere in the whole house. And in the corner of that floor, built from the same dry wood and palm thatch, a clay cooking fire. 2 men crouched beside it, turning bananas over the flame. Burning. Every day. It sounds like madness. It isn't. The smoke from the fire helps drive away mosquitoes. The Korowai figured that out over generations, and it has worked for centuries. Getting up requires climbing a single tree trunk with small footholds carved into the wood. Surface worn, smooth by rain and bare feet. No handrail, nothing to grab. Children do this every day. and to visit first several days by river, then several more on foot through dense jungle, heat, humidity, no trail worth calling a trail. Very few outsiders have ever seen these homes with their own eyes. This is one of the last corners of the earth where people still live this way. The Korowai didn't build this high because they wanted a view. They built this high because down there, the ground was trying to kill them. And up here, impossibly, they are safe. In western Georgia, there is a limestone column called the Katski Pillar. Natural, isolated. The sides are completely vertical. No ledges, no cracks wide enough to grip. It rises about 130 feet straight out of the valley floor, like something the earth pushed up and then forgot about. And on top of it, a church. A wine cellar, a crypt, surrounding walls, a complete ancient monastic complex, all of it sitting on a surface about the size of a large living room. It was built somewhere in the 9th or 10th century, and the first time a modern human being stood on top of that pillar was 1944. For somewhere between 900 and 1,000 years, that church stood up there, unreachable, untouched. It simply existed above the valley, while the world below it changed completely. Here's what no one has ever been able to answer. How did the building materials get up there? The stone blocks, the mortar, the timber. There are no records, no drawings, no accounts of the construction. Whatever method they used, it left no trace. A rope system, a human chain, something else entirely. The question is still open, probably always will be. Today, the only way up is a metal ladder bolted directly into the rock face, and only male monks are permitted to make the climb. The church has been standing up there for over 1,000 years, one of the most isolated places of worship on earth. Nobody built it expecting anyone to ever easily reach it again. Maybe that was the point. December 21st, 1989. A photographer named Jean Guichard was in a helicopter passing over the La Jument lighthouse off the island of Ushant on the coast of Brittany, exactly as a storm was hitting the tower full force. He had his camera. He took the shot. The image shows a wave nearly 100 feet high, the height of a building 10 stories tall, swallowing the entire lighthouse. Only the very top remains visible above the water, and standing in the open doorway, one hand on the frame, is the lighthouse keeper, Theodore Malgorn. He had stepped outside at exactly that moment. Between him and the ocean, about half a second. That photograph became famous around the world. Malgorn survived. Brittany's keepers had a name for the lighthouses stranded out in the open sea like this one. They called them Les Enfers, the Hells, some of the loneliest postings on Earth. But here's what the photograph doesn't show: the days between storms, when the sea goes flat and the tower stops shaking and there is nothing, no sound worth speaking of, no one to talk to, space too small to pace properly. The keepers here had an unwritten rule: don't stare at the water too long. Not because of the danger, because of the isolation. They invented tasks just to move the hours along. The storm you can prepare for. The silence is the thing that gets you. The hotel has 3 rooms. Each one is a glass capsule bolted to the side of a cliff 400 meters above the valley floor. To check in, you climb. Not stairs, not a path. A via ferrata iron rungs drilled directly into the rock face, one after another, straight up. The climb takes about an hour. You are clipped to a cable the whole time, which is reassuring right up until you look down and realize the cable is the only thing between you and the sacred valley of the Incas, roughly 1,300 feet below. The capsules are transparent on all sides. At night, the stars are directly above you. At dawn, the entire valley fills with light, clear on all sides. At night, the stars are directly above you, unobstructed. At dawn, the light comes through the valley and fills the entire room. Dinner is served on the cliff face, a proper gourmet meal brought up by the guides, eaten while your feet dangle over nothing. And the bathroom. The bathroom has a window that looks straight down into the canyon. There is no tactful way to describe the experience of using it. Checkout the next morning means stepping onto a zip line and riding it back down to the valley, 7 lines, nearly 2 miles of cable total. The longest run is half a kilometer. The Sky Lodge has been operating since 2013. It books out months in advance. Apparently, once you've slept 400 meters off the ground, a regular hotel room feels like a waste of a perfectly good night. You would walk right past it. There is no sign, no path leading directly to it. From the Via Ferrata route on Monte Cristallo in the Italian Dolomites, the Bivacco Buffa di Perero appears without warning pressed into a crack in the cliff face at 2,760 meters. The rock on 3 sides is the wall. The rock above is the ceiling. The front facade is the only thing that distinguishes it from the mountain behind it. To get there, you cross the Cristallo suspension bridge first. 27 meters of cable and plank spanning a drop that hits you in the stomach before you see it. This bridge was used as a filming location for Cliffhanger in 1993, which tells you something about the terrain. After the bridge, the route continues on iron rungs bolted into bare rock. Snow, loose stone, and exposure are constant companions. One mistake, and the mountain reminds you how far down it is. The shelter itself was originally a WWI military barracks. The roof collapsed under snow years later. In 2022, soldiers from Italy's 6th Alpine Regiment climbed up and rebuilt it. 12 wooden bunks inside. No electricity, no running water. It is never locked, always open. Because in the Dolomites, when a storm closes the route without warning, the difference between this shelter existing and not existing is the difference between a bad night and not coming home. From the valley below, you look up at Taiyuan Mountain in the Qinling Range of Shanxi, China, and see it. A small golden structure sitting on a rock ledge, 3 sides of it opening directly into the abyss. No visible support beneath it. Just the cliff face, and then that. The hall is no small thing, several tons of stone and tile, and it has sat on that ledge for over 500 years. The total surface area connecting it to the mountain, the footprint of the whole hall on solid rock, is roughly 65 square feet, about the size of a large bathroom. It has been called the most dangerous house in the world. The Ming Dynasty builders used no cement, no binding agents of any kind. Instead, they carved into the rock itself and locked the stone together, piece by piece. It is one reason the hall has stood through 5 centuries of storms and earthquakes. At this altitude, the temple sits above the cloud line most of the year. The lower slopes disappear into white. The golden roof catches the light above it, and because it stands at the highest point for miles in every direction, it has been struck by lightning more times than anyone has counted. It has never burned, never collapsed. The Taoist monks who chose this lonely site weren't looking for a dramatic view. In Taoist tradition, the harder a place is to reach, the closer it sits to what they were searching for. The isolation wasn't a problem to solve, it was the entire point. From a distance, the village of Haid al-Jazil, deep in Yemen's Wadi Doan, looks like something out of a story. Multi-story mud brick buildings stacked on top of each other, rising from the flat desert floor. The whole settlement perched on a single monolithic rock that climbs nearly 500 feet straight up out of the earth. Then you start thinking about what it actually takes to live there. There is no water on top, not a well, not a spring, not a natural source of any kind. Every drop of water in Haid al-Jazil has to be carried up from the valley below. Water to drink, water to cook with, water to wash with, on foot, on narrow stone steps carved into the cliff face, under temperatures that can reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Every day, up and down, in that heat. The houses themselves have stood for centuries. Mud, brick, straw, no cement, no steel, nothing modern holding it up. And the bedroom windows look straight out into open air. No ledge below them, no barrier, just the wall, then the window, then 500 feet of nothing down to the desert floor. You wake up here every morning to that view. At some point, it stops being terrifying and becomes simply the window. The stone steps are the only way in or out. No vehicle has ever reached the top. No road ever will. One of the most isolated places on Earth that anyone still calls home. Everything that has ever gone up or come down from Hyde al-Jazeel has gone on someone's back one step at a time. Electricity reaches the village for 11 hours a day, from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. The rest is darkness and heat, and nearly 70% of the houses here have already crumbled to rain, erosion, and termites. The buildings are still standing, some of them still occupied. From a distance, the rock formation doesn't look real. A stone column rises 100 meters straight up from an already impossibly high mountain, then splits at the top into two separate peaks, connected by a narrow stone bridge. On each peak, a temple, both of them sitting in. To get there, you climb 888 steps. Then near the summit, the stairs give way to chains bolted into the rock face. You grip the metal with both hands and pull yourself up. The pilgrims who make this journey, some of them elderly, some of them barefoot, have been doing it for centuries. The two temples at the top are not duplicates. They were built that way deliberately. One is dedicated to Sakyamuni, the Buddha of the present. The other to Maitreya, the Buddha of the future. Standing on the bridge between them, 1 foot on each side, you are technically standing between now and what comes next. Nobody planned that as a metaphor. It's just the geography. On most days, the valley below disappears completely into cloud cover. The peaks sit above the white. The bridge floats. The temples look like they were built on nothing at all. The name Fanjing is a short form of Fantian Jingtu Brahma's Pure Land. Buddhists have considered this mountain sacred for over 1,000 years. Looking at it, it's not hard to understand why. path up goes through pine forest, dense quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own breathing clearly. Then the trees thin out, and there it is. White walls, gold roofs, 4 temples pressed directly into a vertical cliff face 900 meters above the valley floor. Prayer flags stretch from the rock to the edge of the structure, snapping in the Himalayan wind. In winter, fog rolls in and swallows the whole thing, the cliff, the temples, the flags, until nothing is visible from below. Then it clears, and the monastery reappears exactly where it always was. The only way up is on foot, 2 to 3 hours of climbing. Near the top, the path narrows to a cliffside section where there is almost no room to pass another person. Pilgrims have been making this walk for centuries, some of them elderly, some of them barefoot. In April 1998, a fire broke out inside the main temple. The most likely cause, a butter lamp tipping onto dry timber. The monastery's greatest strength, its unreachable position, became the reason no one could save it. No road, no fire engine, no helicopter landing point. The people of the valley stood below and watched the flames from 900 meters down, unable to move. One monk died. The reconstruction took 7 years. Every piece of timber, every stone, every kilogram of supplies carried up the mountain by hand, the same way the original builders had done it 3 centuries before. Inside the rebuilt temples behind the main shrines, the cave where Guru Rinpoche meditated in the 8th century is still there, still intact. This is the cave that gave Tiger's Nest its name. Legend says Guru Rinpoche arrived here on the back of a tigress to meditate in isolation. Most people who make the climb say the same thing afterward. The walk up is the point. By the time you arrive, you've already understood something about why this place exists here and not somewhere easier. From the sea, you see it before you understand what it is. A white structure, 8 stories tall, pressed flat against a vertical cliff face 300 meters above the water. No visible base, no surrounding land, just the white building and the rock behind it, and below that, the Aegean. The Panagia Hozoviotisa monastery on the island of Amorgos has been here since the 11th century. The facade is 40 meters wide, but the entrance wall is only 5 meters across. The building doesn't sit in front of the cliff, it grows out of it. To reach the monastery, you climb 300 stone steps. The doorway itself is deliberately low. Everyone who enters has to bow. There is a note on the door that tells you the rules before you enter: long trousers for men, long skirts for women. Keep your voice low. Inside the chapel is smaller than you expect. The ceiling is raw, rock, unfinished, the same cliff face you saw from the sea. Below it, gold icons, candlelight, and dark wood fill a space barely wide enough for 2 rows of pews. monks receive visitors. The walls are covered entirely in framed portraits. Monks and bishops going back centuries, black and white photographs, beside oil paintings, beside modern color prints, all of them watching from the same white wall. Every man who ever kept this place alive, still present in the room. Three monks maintain the entire complex. On weekdays, they sit with visitors and serve cold water, amorgos raki, and Turkish delight. Not as a formality, just because that is what you do when someone has climbed 300 steps to reach your door. From above, it looks like someone dropped a house in the middle of the ocean and forgot about it. The island is a single block of basalt, rising out of the North Atlantic. No harbor, no gradual slope down to the water, just vertical cliffs on every side and a small plateau at the top where the grass holds on. And on that plateau, one white house. That is everything. Nobody is quite sure of the full history of the structure. The records, if they ever existed, have not survived in any clear form. What is known, the island was inhabited centuries ago by a handful of families who fished and hunted puffins from the cliff edges. By the early 20th century, they were gone. What makes it stranger is what came after. Someone lives there now. One person on an island with no fresh water, no road, no neighbors, within miles of open ocean. They have set up beds for visitors in the loft above. Over the years, just over 11,000 people have made the crossing. Each one signed their name in a guest book inside the house, wrote their number next to it, and left. The one person who stays, stays. The cliffs on the southern side drop almost vertically into the water. On the northern approach, if conditions allow, a small boat can land. If conditions do not allow, which is often, the island is simply not reachable. You wait or you do not go. One flight a day onto Aogashima Island, 9 seats, and it gets cancelled regularly whenever the fog rolls in or the wind picks up, which is often. That's your only way out. Aogashima sits in the Philippine Sea, about 200 miles south of Tokyo. One of the most isolated inhabited islands on Earth. From the air, the shape of it stops you cold. A massive outer crater, the rim of an ancient collapsed volcano. And inside that crater, rising up from the floor, a second, smaller volcanic cone. Still active. An island inside an island. A volcano inside a volcano. In 1785, the inner volcano erupted. All 327 islanders were trapped inside the crater. Steep walls on every side, ash and lava rising from below. About half of them managed to scramble onto boats and reach the neighboring island. The other half never made it off. The island was evacuated and abandoned for 50 years. Then people came back. If someone falls seriously ill, they wait. There is no other option. The helicopter comes when it comes. But walk through the village on any given evening, and what you find is not anxiety. Families eating together at the local restaurant, loud and unhurried. Neighbors outside singing. And at the island's small distillery, Aogashima Shuzo, a man pours small paper cups of iochu for the visitors sitting across from him in his cramped workroom. The recipe came to the island centuries ago, carried by exiles who had nothing left but time and sweet potatoes and the knowledge of how to ferment them. Whatever they found inside this crater, it was worth coming back for. It was worth staying. This is not a castle built in front of a cave. It is a castle built inside one. Prejama sits in the mouth of a limestone cave in southern Slovenia, halfway up a cliff face that rises 123 meters straight out of the valley floor. The back wall of the castle is the cave itself. The ceiling in several rooms is raw stalactite. There is no separation between the structure and the mountain because there was never meant to be one. Prejama is the largest cave castle in the world. Inside, the rooms look exactly as you would expect from a medieval fortress built into a cave. Kitchens blackened by smoke, bedrooms carved into the rock, and small windows opening directly onto the cliff. Behind the castle, a tunnel network runs 14 kilometers through the mountain. In the 15th century, a knight named Erazim Lueger used these tunnels to survive a year-long siege by the Austrian army, smuggling in food and fresh cherries, which he reportedly threw down at the soldiers below to mock them. The siege ended not through force, but through betrayal. A servant lit a torch in a window at the moment Erazim walked to the outhouse on the third-floor terrace, signaling to the cannons below exactly where to aim. The outhouse is still there, on the outer wall of the castle, open to visitors. You can stand in the spot. The Roman siege ramp is still there on the western face of the mountain. 500,000 tons of earth and stone piled up 2,000 years ago. Nobody has moved it. You can walk up it today. That alone tells you something about what happened here. Masada is a mesa rising 434 meters above the Dead Sea in the Judean desert sheer cliff on every side. The only natural way up is a winding trail called the Snake Path. It zigzags up the cliff face in full desert sun. Visitors in good shape say it exhausts them. Now imagine doing it in Roman legion armor shield and weapons with defenders throwing stones down from above. The Romans did not try. Instead, they built the ramp. King Herod had built a palace complex on top in the 1st century BCE, complete with massive cisterns carved into the rock that could store years' worth of water. When 960 Jewish rebels made Masada their last stand against Rome in 72 CE, they moved into Herod's fortress and waited. From the summit, they watched the Roman 10th Legion build 8 camps around the mountain, one by one, until they were completely surrounded. That view has not changed. The outlines of all 8 camps are still visible today. When the Romans finally breached the wall, they found almost no one alive. According to the historian Josephus, the defenders had chosen death over capture. Only 28 bodies have ever been found at the site, not 960. In the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, behind glass, sits a braid of a woman's hair and a pair of sandals recovered from Masada. 2,000 years in the desert, still intact. Three basalt pillars rising from the North Atlantic. On the tallest one, a small white building with a red roof. That is everything. The pillar itself is 36 meters of sheer vertical rock. No ledge, no slope, nothing to grip. When construction began in 1938, there were no helicopters. The only way up was by hand on a completely vertical rock face with ropes and basic tools. Project records say that near the top, where the rock offered nothing to grip the climbers, had to hold each other up to reach the summit. Nobody photographed how they did it. The lighthouse took 2 years to build entirely by hand. Inside, just enough room to work and wait out a storm. Keepers who lived here did all three sometimes for weeks at a time, in winds that can exceed 200 kilometers per hour. The lighthouse is automated now. No one lives there. Maintenance crews arrive by helicopter once a year, land on the small helipad, bolted to the rock, do what needs to be done, and leave. The pillars around the base are home to one of the largest puffin colonies in the North Atlantic. The birds nest in the narrow crevices of the rock, which means for part of the year, this is one of the most isolated places on Earth, and also, somehow, one of the noisiest. The light still works, every night, pointed out to sea, warning ships away from the rock that was almost impossible to build on in the first place. "900 meters above the valley floor, pressed into a sheer white cliff face in central Montenegro, the Ostrog Monastery looks less like a building than a mistake of the light. a gleaming white structure that should not be there halfway up a rock wall that offers nothing flat to stand on. The monks who built this in 1665 did not construct walls in the conventional sense. They used the cave itself as the wall. 2 natural cave chambers became 2 churches. The raw rock face became the ceiling, the floor, the back wall. Seventeenth-century frescoes were painted directly onto the uneven rock, working around every crack and protrusion. Inside one of those churches, the relics of Saint Basil of Ostrog have remained since his death in 1671. Pilgrims come from across the Balkans and beyond, Orthodox Christians, Catholics, Muslims, all of them. The tradition is to walk the 3 kilometers from the lower monastery to the upper monastery barefoot on a steep mountain path with cliff edges on either side. Over 100,000 people make the journey every year. According to local legend, water began to flow from the rock wall at the spot where Saint Basil once prayed. Visitors today can still see water running down the stone surface there. In 1942, a German artillery shell struck the monastery wall. It split in 2 on impact. It did not explode. The 2 halves are still in the upper monastery today, kept behind glass. The monks do not offer a technical explanation for why the shell failed to detonate. They simply kept it. From 20 kilometers away on the French mainland, you can already see it. A granite rock rising sharply from a flat bay, and on top of it, centuries of stone stacked so high the Gothic spires disappear into the clouds. It looks like something a medieval painter invented. It is entirely real. The tide in the bay rises and falls up to 15 meters, the most extreme tidal range in Europe. At low tide, the rock sits in the middle of vast exposed mudflats. A 2-kilometer bridge connects it to the mainland, and you can walk across or take a shuttle. Around 3.5 million people do exactly that every year, making it the most visited site in France, outside of Paris. On top of the rock, a medieval complex has been standing since the 8th century. An abbey, a monastery, Gothic halls, fortified walls, watchtowers, all of it built upward layer by layer, century by century, each generation adding another level toward the sky. Medieval builders brought every stone and timber across the bay, working with the tides. One of the Gothic flying buttresses is not purely structural. It contains a hidden staircase carved in lace-like detail directly into the granite, leading to the bell tower. At the very top, the statue of Archangel Michael serves as both the spiritual crown of the structure and its lightning rod. During the 100 Years' War, English forces besieged Mont Saint-Michel repeatedly. The tide did most of the defending. The mount never fell. After the French Revolution, the monks left, and the abbey became a prison. For 70 years, 14,000 prisoners passed through what was called the Bastille of the Seas. Today, only 23 people actually live on the mount. And somewhere inside the abbey, 12 monks and nuns still gather 3 times a day for prayer, as the tide comes in and goes out beneath them, just as it has for over 1,000 years. And after all of that, the strangest thing about these places isn't how they were built. It's why people stayed. On cliffs, on islands, in caves, above oceans, above clouds. Places where common sense suggested they shouldn't, yet generation after generation chose to remain. Maybe that's why these places still fascinate us, not because they're impossible, but because someone looked at an impossible place and decided to call it home.